Good morning. Welcome to the first day of our 30-day agent training class. This is a comprehensive training, everything soup to nuts that you want to know to have a successful real estate career and to improve your education of knowing how to work with buyers and sellers and have a successful transaction. At LAER, we always want to give back to our agents by providing education, training sessions, live webinars, live events with the most up-to-date tools and technologies available to help you be the best that you can be by supporting you in your business. Let me introduce Eric Pelletier, and he will tell you more about today's class.
Hi. So my name is Eric Pelletier, as some of you have already heard. I am from the Bedford, New Hampshire office. I am an associate broker. Prior to joining LAER, I did have my own company, my own realtor office, and I've been very active at both my local and state level as well as the national level of realtors. I am a realtor nerd. I've traveled all over the country teaching the designation, certification, and elective classes through REBI and REBAC, the NAR designations, accredited buyer representative, seller representative specialist, senior real estate specialist, and things of that nature. So today we're going to go over the agency disclosures for both New Hampshire and Massachusetts, as well as the lead paint disclosure. So in the books, if you can go to page 7, it's going to be the easiest place to start. So page 7 and 8.
Oh, you don't have it?
Yeah. So first, a little bit of the history of broker relations. Prior to 1992, okay, there wasn't buyer agency. Buyer agency started in the late 80s in Colorado with one company, and in the early 90s, NAR purchased that terminology, adopted it, and much like the internet, buyer agency was going to destroy our industry. I don't know if you guys know that or not. We're never going to make it through buyer agency, and here we are, 2019, and we're still kicking. And now we have the internet to deal with, right? Mm-hmm. So, anybody been in the business since early 90s? You weren't even born. So
I wait for that comment everybody.
But Susan was. So we have these terms. Now, Massachusetts and New Hampshire differs greatly. In New Hampshire, we have about 12 different agency relationships that you can have. Massachusetts, they oversimplified, and according to them, there's only a couple. So agent, that's us. Real simple. The authorized representative. A client, that's the person that we represent. Now, if I was Joe Consumer and I came to you and said, hey, can you tell me about this house? Am I your client? No. No, at that point you're a customer. So that's the difference between a customer and a client. Mm-hmm. And then designated agency. I know that there's a wide array of different people coming from different agencies. LAER Realty Partners, we're a designated agency. What that means is that you represent the client. If you have a managing broker, they also represent that client. So if they are a producing managing broker and they bring a buyer to your listing, you then have a disclosed dual agency situation that you need to be aware of. The other thing is, if you're a mass agent and Stacy brings you a buyer and she is the producing agent for the buyer, then in that case it would also be. So that's just something to keep in mind. However, if you are on a team but you didn't market as a team and you represent the seller as yourself, then there's no dual agency disclosure needed. Okay. Facilitator. Here we go. So the facilitator, that means you represent nobody. All you're doing is shuffling papers. When we get to page 7 in that form, there is a box you can check to say facilitator, and there's a lot of confusion in Massachusetts, okay? Because you only have 3 choices, and if you look at that right in the middle of page 7, It says licensee named below is working as a, and it says check 1. Seller's agent, buyer's agent, or facilitator. If somebody, you just get a fresh lead, you sit down with them, you do your buyer consultation, you haven't signed a buyer agency, are you their buyer's agent? No, but it doesn't give you an option on this because you may not be a facilitator either, because you may represent the seller. I can tell you that this question has come up quite a bit. I've called the state and got a hold of their investigation unit and talked to one of their investigators. They have no clear answer on how to fill this out. So you have somebody, great answer, right? Yeah. So on this form, you have somebody that comes to you and says, I want you to write up the offer, but I don't want you to represent me, and it's your listing. Standard of practice has been check your seller's agent representative, but have them sign that they're the buyer. Down here, check buyer. How does that work?
Well, it's the same way as disclosing it, right? You're disclosing that, you're the seller's agent and they're just notifying, hey, I'm the buyer, so, I guess that makes sense.
So they don't have a realtor at all?
So they don't have a realtor. They have no representation. Where this becomes a little dicey is the minute they say, well, what do you think we should put in for an offer? And you give them advice, you've become their agent. And you've now crossed into dual agent. That's not disclosed. So if you're gonna do that, if you're gonna write up an offer for somebody, you have to be strong enough and it's our natural instinct. We're all helpers, right? That's why we got into this, because we love people in houses and we want to help people, right? So doing that, the minute you say, give your opinion on anything about the house. Now, I'm not talking about disclosure. What's that brown spot on the ceiling? It's a brown spot on the ceiling. That's fine. Do you think that roof's gonna last another 10 years? Oh yeah, I think so, or I don't know. I don't know is a fine answer. I think so, or I don't think so. You're now giving them advice and acting as their realtor, okay? You don't have to agree with me on that. I'm just telling you that that is the way that it would be seen if it got before the commission for a hearing on whether or not you violated the consumer's rights. So make sure you check that. Another good standard of practice is on page 8. Has all your definitions. It's on the back side of the disclosure. I always have my clients or my customers initial on the back. I don't have them initial every single one, but if I'm representing them as a buyer's agent, I have them initial that. If I'm representing them as a seller, I have them initial that. And if I'm not, representing them at all, I may have them initial both just to make sure I cover my butt, so that they know that, hey, you didn't go over that with me. Oh, I had you initial, and I do go over every single word on that. So, anybody New Hampshire licensed? Okay.
Worked on it.
Yeah, working on it.
Standing.
Okay, so that's a whole nother day, but page 9 and 10, I really wish now again, I've been all over the country. Yes, I'm from New Hampshire. However, putting that bias aside, I still think this is the best form out there. And the reason for that is because at the very top of it, it tells you what a customer is, what a client is, and it tells you what your responsibilities are to them. Okay, so, and then on the back side, if you go to page 10, you can see we have several different relationships, agency relationships, including the one on the very bottom that says another relationship, which is our free pass there. So when we're talking to somebody, if they don't want to sign an agency agreement that day, we say, that's fine. And I have them initial the other relationship, So when do we have to go over these forms with people?
First meeting.
In the very beginning.
So I always love the answer first meeting. How many people have it in their email signature with a link to it?
Ah, that's a good idea. Well,
It's not a good idea.
Really? Well, if you're if you're talking to somebody on the phone about a property, shouldn't, I mean,
Correct.
it should be brought up, but it's a little bit more difficult, I suppose.
So technically what the law says is that we have to do it before the first conversation about a specific property. If somebody says to you on the street, how's real estate? And you say, good, you don't have to do a disclosure. If they say, what's the market like in Tewksbury? You don't have to have a disclosure. If they say, hey, can you tell me anything about 123 Main Street? That's when you say, I'd love to. There's just some information that the state wants me to go over with you to make sure you're informed about your rights and stuff, and just work it into your spiel, okay? So it's the first talk about a specific property. So some people put it in their email signature and then consider that as giving that disclosure. In New Hampshire, they're real bad about that. That doesn't work, because one, you have no way to prove that they clicked on it. And two years ago, New Hampshire Real Estate Commission changed their website. So that link that everybody's been using for the last 15 years doesn't work. So best practice is if you're gonna do it over the phone and give information, then email them, put it in .loop, send it to them. One, it gives you a reason to get their email. Say, there's a state required form, and just leave it at that. So, and then you want to go over it. Don't just say, did you read it? It's, people do it all the time, but we are highly paid professionals, right? All right, so who gets this? Everybody we talk to about a specific. Have to keep it on file for 3 years. We have it in .loop, so if you create a loop for everybody you talk to, I don't know, how many people love .loop?
Oh, I have a question. What if, like, you switch a brokerage and that .loop no longer exists?
Okay,
Like, that just happened to me. So all those transactions are gone.
so 2 things. One, if you know you're gonna switch, there is a way to actually, with .loop, set it up so everything gets backed up to your Google Drive.
Really?
We'll have we'll have a whole thing on .loop and backup and records, but for your case, you were the designated agency or agent. However, you're not the broker of record, so
they have that.
the brokerage has it, and if something was to come up, they have to provide that documentation, because if there's a complaint made, it's not just made about you. The managing broker or team manager and then the principal broker all have to answer the same thing. So they already have the paperwork, they have to have it as well. So it doesn't matter whether it's because you left a brokerage or if you're at the same one. If you did something and there was a claim made or a complaint filed with the commission, you would get a letter, Stacy would get a letter, and both of you would have to go, and the paperwork would be there.
Okay.
So that's the way that works. Now,
So you'd have to have them re-sign for the new company. You'd have to start a new loop.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It's unfortunate, but.
And then I'm just gonna say, for myself, best practices, I never ever, when I'm going over the form, I never ever say, sign here. I'm gonna go over the way I do it real quick. So we've just sat down, we've talked, and I said, now Mr. and Mrs. Spire, I just want you to know this is what I have to tell you with regards to what the state wants me to make sure you're aware of to protect your rights. I go through the bullet points, and I come down here, and I say, now, I'm not gonna ask you to sign this. You've probably talked to 2 or 3 agents that if they've showed you this, they said you need to sign. This is not a contract, and I can initial right here that you've declined to sign. I can't think of any time when anybody says, oh no, okay, go ahead and initial. They always say, oh, we have no problem signing. That's when I know I have them bought into me, as opposed to me saying, I need you to sign this. All of a sudden walls go up, because nobody wants to be sold and nobody wants to sign anything. Massachusetts, same way. There's a box on the bottom. You can go through the form with them and say, now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller or buyer, I filled in your information here. I want you to know you do not have to sign. I just have to check this box right here that you declined to sign. And if they turn around and say, okay, check the box. If they say, oh, we don't have a problem signing that, great. Then you've bought some buy-in from them, okay?
You always give them that option at the time?
I never even give them, I don't even give them an option to sign. If they sign, it's because they're choosing.
Okay.
I just automatically say, now you don't have to sign this, I can initial right here saying that you declined to sign. Psychologically, they don't want to decline anything because who wants to be the bad guy? Secondly, if they do sign, then again, it's saying, we trust you. So, 3 years, keep it on file. Then the open house exception.
Well, you have the open house disclosures to put up, correct?
Right, so you don't have to do this form for everybody that comes into your open house. There's a separate form that gets, you have to display it prominently.
Saying you're hosting the open house?
Correct.
Yeah.
Or
Now,
you're representing the sellers.
correct. So here's the thing, is how many people have done an open house for another agent? Okay. Who do you represent?
No one.
No one.
You're a facilitator at the end of it. Well, right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, technically you're a facilitator, right? So, because you don't have an interest in either party. So if somebody comes in and starts talking to you and you want to discuss this property and capture them as a client, to cover your butt, I would do the form because you don't represent the seller. And that's what happens a lot of times, especially with new agents, is they don't realize, well, I just did this open house, so I must be representing the seller. No. And it's important that whoever's listing that is, that they explain to their seller, because the seller may have the idea that whoever's in the house is representing them, and that would be a mischaracterization of what that person's doing. Okay?
Doesn't that kind of feed off the fact that of us being a designated agency as well?
It does. And that's where the rub comes in. If we were just a traditional agency, then we would all represent every seller and every buyer. So
So then you could potentially always be a dual agent, in a sense, like if, so like if we were not designated agency and you had an open house and a buyer came in, technically you now represent both parties.
correct.
That's confusing. Like that, I mean, like, not confusing, but that's just like weird.
And a few years ago, the thought of having a designated agency was weird. So
Yeah.
that's
What are some examples of a traditional agency?
a lot of independents are, and there's a couple large independent companies that still practice traditional. So, you know, it all depends. It's really a moot point for us, just if you ever decide to go somewhere else, which why would you? But make sure you know what type of agency, because it could be a big factor, because a lot of clients won't want to do dual agency, and if you can't, you know, if your office has 30 listings, that's 30 properties you can't show if they don't agree to dual agency. So, all right. So what are our responsibilities? What do we need to make sure they understand? Well, we have fiduciary responsibilities. As a customer, whose interest are we looking out for?
Well, no one's really, I don't think they're sellers.
Our own.
Yeah.
So if they don't want to be represented by you, then that's fine. Just know the minute you tell them your best interest is my best interest, then you're stepping over the line and taking them into being a client. If they're the client, if they are a client, then your fiduciary responsibility is to them. Anybody watch $1 Million Listing New York?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yes. So I watch those are my two reality shows, the LA and New York, okay? So this past season, one of the guys had a penthouse or a condo listing. I think it was $2 million. He ended up, it sat on the market. He put in an offer for 1.2 because it was just sitting and he wanted to buy it. So he talked to his seller, said they agreed. They put it under contract in escrow for 1.2. 2 days later, he got an offer for 1.4. He went to his client and said, I just got this offer for 1.4. It's a better deal for you. If you want, I'll withdraw my offer, remove my escrow, and you can accept this other offer. That is what it means to be a seller's agent. You put your client's interest ahead of yours, okay? I don't know if you've seen them in the MLS. In New Hampshire, you're gonna see them. In Massachusetts, I'm sure you're gonna see it. If it's not already there, $1 co-broke fees. They're coming out. So, if that listing it says it's a $1, you got to make sure you're aware of that, and how to get paid if it's a $1 co-broke. We'll have another class on that. But it's out there. There's an agent in Amherst, New Hampshire that puts $1 for all their co-brokes, and it's not a mistake of 1%, because an agent that I know made that mistake of thinking it was a typo, and I call them an Alta, but on the CD, they got paid $1.
You have
So-
to think that would like push agents away from even showing the house in a sense.
But it can't.
It can't, but.
It shouldn't.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of this. If you see that, you still have to give it, make it
Your client's best interest.
right. So how do you counter that? What I do is, so I have on my buyer agency agreements, I get 3%. We're all for the same company. I can talk fee without it being monopoly type thing. So I put a 3% in all of my buyer agency contracts. And anytime we go see a house, as part of my viewing packet, I always include the MLS sheet that shows the percentage of the co-broke. And I explain to them. And if there's one that's a $1 or 1% or even 2%, I make sure they see that and say, now, just so you understand, I have no problem showing you this house. Understand there's a difference between what our contract is and what they're offering. And so that will appear on the Alta as an additional fee for you. And then it's their choice. If they say, oh, no, I only want to see houses that are going to cover my contract, that's fine. I can then say, that's their choice. That's what they want, instructed me to do. Go ahead.
Do you find that when those cases come up that do you ever try to get the seller, like, explain that we can up the offer and offset that in a commission that the seller pays?
I do. And it's not as simple as I just made it sound.
Yeah.
And there are instances where maybe I do an addendum and lower it. But I can tell you that my 2017, I don't have 2018 numbers yet, but 2017, my average fee was 2.78. So I track it and I try to make sure I'm within. Sometimes there's families, sometimes there's first-time home buyers that are cash strapped, and I understand that. I'm gonna go here first.
Can we go back to the listing and when I know every situation with a seller is different. Can you explain a scenario where, as you're doing the listing paperwork with the seller, it ends up being the $1? Why would that happen?
I'm not quite sure I understood. Why would it end up that the seller's only offering a $1 co-broke?
That's right.
So there are a lot of different business models out there. There's flat fee agencies, there's no fee agencies, there's, some people right now, I don't mean to step on anybody's toes, but if you take a listing at 4%, you're working for free. By the time you pay your split, your co-broke, and all the incidentals that come in, you're spending a lot more time working for free. But there's agents out there that'll do it. There are agents out there that say, hey, look, I want your listing. I'll do it at 3%. Keep that 3% and put $1 as the
That's what I was
co-broke.
thinking.
So, I would not be surprised if 3-4 years from now, buyer agents are getting paid by the buyers, seller agents are getting paid for the sellers. Let me put a caveat. There's one exception to this rule. If you have a VA buyer, they cannot pay anything towards commission. So if you have a VA buyer and a $1 or 1% or 2% listing that you're showing them, you've got to accept it at that. I don't want to go into the different ways to approach working with the other agent as far as raising the co-broke. That's another class in itself, and it would eat up our good portion of our morning here. So
I have two
was-
questions.
I should have took you first then, because they're multiplying.
By the way, we're on page 2 if you're trying to find where we are.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Still
Do you-
looking at one.
Yeah.
So do you ever lose clients because of the percentage to, like, get more money from that?
Do I ever lose clients?
They're like, I don't
I
want to do
don't-
that, basically, and.
I don't ever lose a client. I just choose not to work with them.
Okay.
Good answer.
So that's my mindset is I don't need them as much as they need the skill set I bring to the table. And that sounds kind of arrogant, but I know I bring in with them my last 5 close sheets, and when I can show them that my average number of days are on market of 3 days, and my average close price is within $1,000 of list price, that to me is more powerful than somebody that comes in and says my average days on market is 27 and I'm at $3,000 below. So it helps me in a couple different ways. One, it helps me is when I'm doing my CMA and they say, oh, now keep in mind New Hampshire's a little bit different price point, but 300,000, I was thinking 350. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I really appreciate you being honest with me and sharing that with me. However, based on my numbers and my history here, I can tell you my average list price is $292 and my average sell price is $293. So I'm confident that I'm within a couple $1,000s here of your price. I can't get to 350. If you want to be at, say, 305, that's great. And let me tell you why that price point's important. At 300, we're going to get people looking at 300 and below and 300 and below, above. And my hope is that we're going to get 7 to 10 buyers in here in the first week, and we're going to get 3 or 4 offers, and we can push it up to that 310, 315 maybe for you. But if we start off at 350, we're cutting out 2 big demographics of buyers. And yep, it only takes one. It only takes one. But if that 350 comes in and we get it and it goes under contract, and 30 days down the road the appraiser comes in and says, oh no, this house is worth 312, do you want to write a check for $38,000 that, you know, for the difference? It's not going to happen. So if you want to use me, that's great. I'll gladly go over that, and we can get the paperwork and get it listed tomorrow. But if we're that far away on price, I may not be the agent for you. I'm not saying there's not agents out there that will take it. I just want to do the best job for you and accomplish your goals. And in order to do that, this is where I need to be. So.
Now, why can't you make a VA make up commissions?
Sure. So VA, they cannot have any additional expenses or costs. It's part of the program.
Okay.
So that's just federal rules.
Okay, but you can make it up in the listing, like, or the offer, saying, hey, I'd like to be paid this on top of our offer.
Right. So it's very important. It's very important when you do that. So NAR has vetted a clause out there for people to use when you want to be compensated above and beyond what's in the MLS. It's very important, and I'll get you the clause. Maybe we can find some time tomorrow, because we're doing fair housing tomorrow. You'll have to look at my face again tomorrow. So tomorrow we're doing fair housing, and I promise you I'll bring in the clause and we'll do a little bit about how to get more than what the MLS is and how to properly word it. I have a friend at another agency who forgot a very key sentence. It's a 2-sentence clause. They only used one of the sentences, and at closing they didn't get a check. And their broker said, well, we should have got a check, so they took out the brokerage split out of their next 2 commissions. But I'll bring the clause in tomorrow, and we'll have a little bit of time to go over that. So, and that again, it's a clause that's vetted through NAR. Their attorneys wrote it. So, informed consent. So, you just make sure you are sharing. If you have a client, you have to share whatever information you know with them. Vicarious liability is something you guys have to worry about here in Massachusetts. The buyers or sellers, they are responsible for whatever you say. We don't have that in New Hampshire. So,
We have like buyer beware in New Hampshire, basically.
Yeah.
You have to do your due diligence as a buyer and a buyer's agent.
so buyer beware and vicarious liability are 2 different things. Buyer beware, that's Massachusetts is as well.
Yep.
So you have, you sell a house and then 2 months later you find out that something wasn't disclosed, technically you can't go back on the seller. People
They
still
didn't
do.
know.
Well, they may very well have known.
Yeah, but if it's something that like
To
is
prove,
a surprise to everybody.
right, to prove malicious intent is gonna be hard. So for an example, there's a transaction, matter of fact, I think it was a LAER agent that was in one of my classes who, a week before closing, they went to get homeowners insurance and they pulled a clue report, the insurance company did, and they said, did you realize there was a $50,000 claim for water damage 2 years ago? Well, there was nothing on the property disclosure. This client had extreme allergy issues and the home inspector didn't find mold, but the seller never disclosed it. So, lesson learned from this? Who's reading, anybody heard of the book club? So we're reading the Oz Principle. It's an amazing book about accountability and self-perseverance. Stacy did an amazing article a couple weeks ago where she opened up about a thing that happened to her. And so go on to Jostle and read that. But in the Oz Principle, it talks about how we can reverse our problems and take ownership and don't worry about somebody else fixing it. So what did we learn from this lesson? One, make sure our buyers are checking on the home insurance as soon as they go under contract. Because if you wait till the end, sure, they can get it at the end, but what happens if there's something in that clue report? And for those who don't know what clue is, it's basically the credit report that goes with the house or the car or the person about insurance claims. So had that person done it in the first 10 days, they would have known about that in the first 10 days and could have had that questions and stuff mitigated. So should the sellers have said, hey, we had a $50,000 claim a couple of years ago? Yeah, but at the same time, if it was mitigated,
They probably felt no reason to
they
bring
felt
it
no
up.
reason.
It was fixed.
Right. And the house did end up having mold issue in it. Go ahead.
So you see a lot of, in MLS, you see so many listings where there's just no disclosures. At what point does it become a legal issue?
It doesn't. So there's a lot of people who are under the misunderstanding that property disclosures are required. That's not true. Okay? Under federal law, we're required to ask 4 things. If it's 1978 or older, older than 1978, we have to ask about lead paint. Okay? If it's any house, we have to ask about the water source, public, private. We have to ask about the sewer, public, private, and we have to ask about the insulation.
I didn't know about the insulation.
I didn't know.
So,
Formaldehyde.
right, for the formaldehyde, yeah,
Oh.
and asbestos, yeah. So those are the 4 things, but we have the MAR or whatever forms you guys use in Massachusetts, we have them in .loop. So never tell your client they don't have to on this one. Give it to them to fill out. Most of the time they will. And tell them check unknown. If you either don't want to answer, don't tell me the answer and then check unknown. If you don't know the answer, check unknown. If you know the answer, answer it correctly. If you're dealing with an REO, a bank-owned, or a foreclosure property, you're going to see the disclosure with just a big X.
Yeah. The bank doesn't
The
know
bank
anything
doesn't
about
know, and they're not going to take that liability. So the form is not required for the consumer. We have the form. Put it online. Some people say, well, we don't want to put it online because we don't want the appraisers having it. It's the stupidest excuse I've ever heard. Anybody listening that does that for that reason, I'm sorry that I just said your excuse is stupid, but it is. So, uh-oh, Susan's got her hand up.
So the other thing to remember is that sometimes people have only lived in a house 2 or 3 years. So how much history of the house do they know? I had a house in the Westlands in Chelmsford. I've told this story a million times. I think it had been sold 6 times since maybe 1930. So I was a buyer's rep, and we're in the basement. We pushed those squares in the ceiling to the side, and the beams were charred. So there had been a fire in the house. But the present owner had only lived there 3 years. He wouldn't have known. So
Never went up into the
it's kind of, buyers may feel it's wonderful to have it, but if you have a buyer if you have a seller that's only lived there a couple of years, how much history of the house is he going to know anyway? Only what he's experienced or updated or whatever when he's
So
lived
then you
there.
wouldn't have disclosed that, the charge.
Yeah, they didn't know.
He wouldn't have
They didn't
known.
go up into
Right.
that drop
Right.
ceiling.
And obviously that seller had not had that looked at when he bought the house 3 years ago because it was a surprise to him. So
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Well, it should have shown up in the inspection, I would think.
If they didn't go into the drop ceiling. then
Right.
It's
Right.
not gonna show.
So,
It's all based on your inspector.
LAER agents are the best agents, right?
Yes.
Yes. And we always go above and beyond, right?
Yes.
So how many people, when you have a buyer who wants to put in an offer, or you have a listing, go in and look the MLS for previous sales and pull the previous one? I always bring it with me in my listing meetings, and I say, look, this is what we know that's available. So kind of helps them say, I don't know this stuff. Here you go. This is from when you bought it.
Yeah.
So if I'm going with a buyer and the house is sold a couple times in the last 10 years, because there's plenty of history in there, I can look and see. I can also see this house sat on the market for 343 days and was added to somebody's Christmas card list. So just make sure you're researching the property. Sometimes people get into the business and they're like, or they've been in the business for a while and they're like, I'm just a mobile set of keys. I'm just keys to the neighborhood. No, you're more than that. You have to be the historian of the neighborhood. So, boy, we really went off a little bit there, but so
Good.
that's what this is for, though, right? That's why it's important. Look, what you guys get out of today may be completely different if you come back and do this 6 months from now, or a year from now, or a year and a half from now. The discussion may go another route. So, all right, types of brokerage relationships. We went over these. I'm going to see here. Ooh.
Your old car, Suze.
So just FYI, we still see sub agency.
Is sub-agency when you're like a team member on
No. So sub agency was prior to buyer agency, and what a sub agent was anybody that brought somebody to the house. They were a sub agent they were an agent under the listing agent.
Huh.
So
But most people don't offer sub-agency anymore.
it doesn't
It
doesn't
exist.
exist. Yeah, it's a blue law basically. You know what a blue law is. So
Yeah.
I thought it was like if I took a listing on the Cape, and there was no way I could sub it to a brokerage down there and say, you have the same right to sell it.
the new terminology is co-listing.
Okay,
So it works the same way.
yeah.
So it's just when you have two listing agents, it's a co-listing, right?
Right. Again, prior to 1992, anybody that wasn't the listing agent was the sub-agent. They technically worked for the seller. Prior to buyer agency, buyers had no representation,
Yeah, it was just,
which is just
you're free for all. Okay.
blows my mind. But that's why if you look in 2001, buyer agency representation was only at 62%, 61 and some change percent, whereas now it's 88. It's because it was still new.
Yeah.
It was
What'd you
new.
say? Did you say 92?
No, in 2001.
No.
Oh, 92 is,
So I was on one of the committees, and I remember going to North Reading when we had a couple of boards meeting together, and it was the hardest thing. So people who owned brokerages, who had been in business at that time for like 30 years, they couldn't understand at all this new concept, which actually took liability off the seller. But the small independent offices had the hardest time being open to this new concept and realizing that there was a big benefit to it.
there was over a 10% attrition rate from agencies deciding they didn't want to sell anymore because of buyer agency. So you think, if you can remember back to Zillow and how that was going to destroy, and now all these other things that are going to destroy, it's always been there. this change and stuff is nothing new. So, what page are we on
We're
this?
on, but that's, yep, on page 3.
Page 3. So old car. I'm not really good with acronyms. I know a lot of people use it, right? Is that what it is, acronym? Or what are these things called?
Yeah, it's an acronym.
Okay, acronym. So I'm not, the only one I ever remembered was I racked my brains to Baghdad. So Baghdad is the capital of Iraq. That's the only one I've ever been able to remember.
Oh, I'm like, I don't know.
So,
Like, what was that
oh.
one? I didn't learn that in high school.
We still had textbooks and dust and chalk.
I went to a book school. We had classroom textbooks.
Okay, all right. So old car, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and reasonable care. Let's talk about these real quick. Obedience. I always love obedience. What does that mean?
Basically, you have to do what your client wishes as long as it's within your legal boundaries of your job, correct?
Yes, you can't kill or maim anybody.
Yeah.
But, and that's what I tell them. I say I can help you to the full extent that I'm capable of. I just can't maim or kill anybody for you. So I also tell them, though, that means that if you tell me to put a $1 offer in, under our buyer agency agreement, I have to put that $1 in. However, before I write it up, we're going to have a talk, and you may want to find a new agent. And I set that up front with them because the truth of the matter is, do I want to put in a $1 offer? No. Do I want to put in a ridiculously low offer? No. We have to have some sort of understanding. So the obedience, yeah, if you tell me you want to do something, absolutely. Loyalty, we talked about this under fiduciary responsibility. Our loyalty is to our client. Doesn't matter how big our wallets get from the transaction. Yes?
Somebody went up against me on that one. They were like, no, your loyalty is to the seller because they're who pays.
Who's your client?
And I told them that's not true.
Yeah.
It's whoever my client is, whoever
Right.
I'm representing. They were like, no.
Yeah. No, you are 100% loyal to whoever it is you represent. Now, if it's a dual agency or disclosed dual agency, who do you represent?
Well, technically nobody. You really can't negotiate at that point for either party because it's on the demand at that point.
You're neutral, right. So if you did a CMA for that listing, you have to provide that same exact CMA and any updates to the buyer as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Anything you do for one, you have to mirror and do for the other. So,
I was I was hosting a seminar, and one of the people sitting in the room was a buyer seminar, and he said, you're paid on commission, right? And I said, yes. And he said, so what's in it for you to negotiate a lower commission for me if that's how you're paid? And I said, phenomenal question. I said, it's extremely important that my clients feel well represented. Word of mouth is huge for us. And if I'm providing a level of service that's not worthy of a 5-star review, you're gonna tell 10 people, and it's gonna, the money that I made on the commission will, the word of mouth by you, spreading that will hurt me 10 times more. So, yeah.
that's awesome. So, Renee, you're absolutely correct in that, and I hope everybody made note of that, because that is the perfect comeback is, I can spend the commission on the sale I make today with you once. I can make the commission on your referrals for a lifetime. So that's awesome. So, disclosure. Whew. What's that brown spot on the ceiling? It's a brown spot. Are you a roofer? In Massachusetts, everything has to be licensed. In New Hampshire, just so you know, if you cross the border, nothing's licensed.
What do you mean?
You don't need a license. You don't need a license to be a roofer. You don't have to have a license to do any of it. So that's right.
Yeah.
Now I will tell you, the only thing you can't do is burn your own leaves.
I know.
Right.
It- So my history is I spent 20 years as a firefighter with the federal government chasing wildfires all over the country. I fought fire in 22 states and 4 countries. Okay? Thank you. So I was I was burning my leaves. Not only was I burning my leaves, I actually had my
Uniform on?
my pants on and my yellow shirt and had my hose and everything all set, and the fire department came and said, you can't do this, and they gave me the RSA, the state law that says that I can't burn leaves on my own property. So I can ride a motorcycle without a helmet. I don't have to have a license to do any technical work, but I can't burn my own leaves. So FYI, New Hampshire, it's almost slip-free or not.
Unless you have a lot of land and they can't see you.
Ooh.
Yeah, I have a neighbor
They'll
that
come
does that.
find you.
Yeah.
Grab the
25
fire
acres
truck
and
right
he
there.
burns his leaves.
But if they say, what's that brown spot? How do you respond to that? It's a brown spot. You know, ice damming is very common. It could be as simple as that. I'm not a roofer, so I can't give you the answer offhand. But during inspection, if this is a home, that's definitely something we want to find. Now, when you're going around the property and showing, again, best practices, we live in a spot, in an area of the world where everything settles. Some foundations are better than others. You see a foundation crack, or you see a settlement crack, you know the house isn't going to fall on itself, but just touch it and acknowledge it. One, it helps you point out that you're paying attention and working for them. And two, you can just say, this is just some, it's probably just a settling crack, it's probably not an issue, but we'll make sure to make a note of it for the home inspector to look at. You see, you go outside and the chimney's at a 45-degree angle. You know, it may not be an issue, but that's something we'll have the home inspector look at if this is the house you decide on. Just be the source of the source, never the source, right? So just something to keep in mind.
That was the best advice I was given 3 years ago when I started. Be the source of the source. If they want to know something about a school system, you send them the link to the town that they're looking in, or the towns that they're looking in. You say, this is where you can find the info.
Yep.
You want sex offender registries, you call the police station for that local town.
So sex offender registry, I'm just going to touch on just real quick. Don't ever give that information because you could be sued for defamation, which is the most ridiculous thing ever, but just tell them, go to the website. So, confidentiality. So there is a confidentiality agreement in .loop. If you have a client that for whatever reason doesn't want their information disclosed, okay, we can disclose now, but a couple years ago, there was a football player for the Patriots who bought a house in Laconia, wanted to be, didn't want that information on there. So prior to submitting the offer, we did the confidentiality agreement and sent it to the sellers to sign. Because if you send your offer with the confidentiality agreement,
It's too late.
right, you already, so do that. And again, it could be a lawyer, it could be a doctor, it could be someone who's just very private. It could be somebody of notoriety. So, you may have to redact their name from it, but make sure you have that confidentiality agreement signed up front.
And why we can't put any celebrities on that list?
Probably.
Most of them, yeah, so most of them are in trusts. Yeah. So,
Me too.
or under a spouse's name or their business manager. So, I mean, Jimmy Fallon, for example, his house is listed under his wife's name. He has a house up in Laconia, so. And he's going to be ready to move soon because him and his kids are outgrowing it. So
You gonna sell it?
maybe. Won't try. All right. So confidentiality, we just did that. Accountability. At the end of the day, you have to be able to sleep at night. That's what I'm going to say about this. You have to be able to sleep at night. You have to do what's best for your client and be accountable to them, but you also have to be accountable to yourself. And if something rubs you the wrong way, if they ask you to do something that you just don't feel comfortable with, don't hesitate to tell them, hey, I'm not really comfortable with what you're asking me to do. Okay? Reasonable care. Are you home inspectors?
No.
Are you appraisers?
No.
Are you any of these other maintenance type people? No. So answer the question to the best of your knowledge and give them the information accordingly. I don't know. So in the really small bottom corner, if you look on page 7, everybody see the little box I was talking about? Just make sure that, check, offer them to do that and check it. Don't push somebody away just because they won't sign something on the first day they meet you. Think about it, have some empathy for them. Think about it from their shoes. You walk into any store, you walk into Target, and somebody comes up to you, and they say, "Can I help you find anything?" What's your first response? No, just looking. You say, "Sign here." Nope, I'm out. All right, so we went over the back page.
So excuse me.
Yes.
If they decline, you don't need their name anywhere on this?
No, you still put
Have
you,
them print their name.
right,
And
put
you
their
still
name.
sign it,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, and you would still sign it.
You still have to print their name, but they refuse to sign it.
Yep.
What if they sign without hesitation? Do you even have to bring that up?
What?
The declining of signing?
Well, he said that was like the first thing.
That-
It's the first thing you bring up?
I will not-
Say you have the option, this is your right to decline to sign this paper.
Right.
But if you'd like to sign it, it's here for you.
So
All you gotta say.
I would go, here, this, just so you know, this is from the Real Estate Commission, and this is not a contract. This is just to inform you of your rights. Blah, 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 blah. And just so you know, I don't represent anybody at this time. However, should you choose to go with me, I would be your buyer's agent. We are a designated agency. So I checked this little box here, just so you know. That means that if you decide to work with me, you're working with me, even though I'm part of the Reliable Realty team, right? Is that the name? Results Realtors, sorry. Oh, my eyes. So, even though I'm part of that team, I'm the one who represents you. So if you have a question, contact me, and we'll go from there. Now, I'm gonna sign, and then I sign in front of them. I don't say this, I just sign. I say, now, you don't have to sign here. I can just check right here that you've declined at this time. Most of the, we have no problem signing. Great, then sign. If they say, yeah, okay, just check the box, then I just check the box.
Now, I always give a copy. Like, I always
You have to
bring-
give a copy.
Yeah, I always bring 2 and sign both of them with them and say, this one's for me, this one's for you. They're identical. If you could just initial these for me, whatever, and then, I
So-
always have them initial the second page for me.
So I do everything digital.
Yeah.
I have an iPad Pro, the big one,
Oh, yeah.
and I use zip forms
Yeah.
as opposed to dot loop. So I have them sign right on my
You can do it
tablet.
in-house.
You can actually do it on dot loop, and when we do a dot loop class, we can certainly show you how to do in-person signing.
I've done one prior.
So, right,
Yeah, I've done them. Sometimes I just.
and that way they get an email right away.
Yeah, I keep the blank agencies on me sometimes, just, some people
It's
rather.
good
paper.
practice, yeah. All right.
Want to take up the break?
Is that, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna take a quick 10-minute break, stretch, drink, whatever the case may be, and then we
Then we're
will,
going to talk about lead paint.
yeah. Actually, before we go to break, anybody have questions or input? There's a lot of experience in the room, so,
So I know you said this isn't a contract, but once you sign the exclusive one, that is a contract, right?
correct.
Okay. Got it.
And is that Monday?
I'm sorry.
Buyer agency is Friday.
Okay.
I think it's
January
Friday.
4th,
Yes,
yeah.
so
Yeah,
we have
Friday.
a guest attorney coming, and Stacy's doing that class too.
This Oh, yes, you might want to look at it.
All right, so second part of day 1, we're going to be talking about lead paint disclosure and why is it important. I can tell you that from 1978 to 1990, there weren't any lead paint criminal charges ever pressed against a real estate person for disclosure. That all changed in 1990. It happened in New Hampshire. Of course it did. So a landlord who owned several pieces of property had tenants, refugees, that had a small child. 18 months old, came here to escape war and famine. This 18-month-old got very, very sick and died. Couldn't figure out why. House was tested. Matter of fact, there's a show, one of the 2020s was actually on this. Comes to find out there was lead paint in the house, which in New Hampshire you don't have to mitigate it. You just have to cover it.
Even if there's kids?
Even if there's kids.
Even in a rental situation?
Even in a rental situation.
You only have to cover it, not.
Right, you just have to paint over it.
Oh, so you don't have to
Yeah,
remediate it?
You don't have to remediate it.
Oh, huh.
So, and you don't have, yeah. So, what happened though was this gentleman, if you can call him that, took the lead paint disclosure and took another form they signed, took the person's signature and photocopied it onto the lead paint disclosure.
Yeah.
He is the only person to ever be arrested and go to jail and be found guilty of this type of death from lead paint.
Now, is that like considered manslaughter?
I believe that's what I
It's
believe.
like involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah,
because-
I mean, it
Did
was.
you know that there was lead though?
Yeah, I mean, you can't live on the west side of Manchester and not know there's lead.
Okay.
So,
You really can't live in New England with
Well,
the potential
true.
of it.
so a little more going off of that story. We all understand it's older than 1978 because in 1978 that's when they said you could no longer make paint with lead. However, if you didn't know this, there were millions and millions of gallons of paint that were created prior to 1978 that sat in warehouses well into the 80s. So, just because a home was built in 1982 doesn't mean there's necessarily not lead paint in it. So when you have that appraisal come back and it says flaking paint, and you're like, well, this house is older than flaking paint than 1978, so we don't have to worry about that. If the appraisal comes back and says flaking paint,
You have to get it tested?
You should.
I don't know if you have to. I don't know what the law is in Massachusetts with regards to having to have it tested. But I know in New Hampshire, there's a lot of times that a house will be built in the mid 80s, and the appraisal will come back that it needs to have paint because of flaking paint.
Great.
In New Hampshire, all we have to do is scrape it and paint it,
Well, Mass, and I believe.
and just that affected area, and it doesn't have to match.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I believe Mass, I forget exactly what it is, because I sold a house that was built in 1890. And it was a foreclosed property, had flaking paint, there was a 1-year-old moving in. And it was, within 90 days of the closing of the home, I believe it was, the situation had to be remedied for.
and I know Massachusetts does have as much.
They don't really necessarily enforce it as far as I've seen. It's like nobody's gonna show up at your house in 90 days and be like, ding, 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 have you, mediated the lead in your house? But you have to disclose it as the agent. There's a paper for it, I forget. And so I had to, do that with my clients and say, listen, there's a potential for lead paint in your house. You have a 1-year-old. You need to have it tested.
I actually had a situation in Fitchburg years ago where it had to be scraped and painted, and they did come out and re-inspect. And it had to be re-inspected before we could go forward to closing, so.
Yeah, I forget what disclosure it was, but I remember reading it and I was like, huh. And I had to share that with my clients.
You had to pay for 2 inspections in that case?
I don't remember if there was an extra charge for the coming back. Okay, yeah.
So Stacy's she has a video on Jostle. Everybody familiar with Jostle?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody knows how to log in?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. There's a lot that don't, so congratulations.
And I forget my password all the time, but I still get it.
Oh, look, I did too.
I've started keeping a spreadsheet because I'm like, what is
I
the
do
password
too.
to this? This is the only one I always forget, and it's the only one that's different. I'm like,
Yeah, but all our passwords are the same. 8 asterisks.
Ah, it's funny.
Oh,
you
I
need
thought
to
you
start
were
a
on this
spreadsheet.
all the time.
Too many asterisks.
I've already signed in twice today too, and I don't know why I'm having issues.
Oh. I can sign in on Jostle.
4th time's a
Last time
charm.
you were here too.
Get Jocelyn. some of the
I
other
don't even know
tab,
what
but I
password
can't
is.
remember
It's saved
that
on
one.
my computer.
Yeah.
I have the
Oh,
app,
really?
so it's
Yeah.
like
We'll leave it
automatically.
for- we can help you with
Sign
that
in.
afterwards.
Yeah.
So I
ask.
changed my password on all my stuff because my phone.
All right, I'm trying one more time, and then I'm gonna have Susan log in.
That's the only reason I started doing my spreadsheet, because I was like, I don't know what
Yeah.
my passwords are anymore.
I know, I have so many now too.
Well, my one for Jocelyn is the only one that's different from everything else. I'm like,
Ah, got it.
okay.
Yeah.
Also, the agents in Fall River, hi, thanks for being
Hi,
here.
agents and Acushnet.
Cushnet, excuse me. It's a hard word to say. Fall River's a lot easier.
And they would say they are not Fall River, they are Acushnet.
Okay, so go into Jocelyn. Let's go to the library.
How many have been in the LAER University?
Yes.
So we'll go over this again at boot camp this month, but there are tremendous modules in the university, and each module that you click on has several webinars within it, a lot of different topics. University.
For the lead paint.
Click on. Got to click on LAER University again twice. And it opens it. Stacy just recently did this, and it's very well done on Lead Paint 101 to make sure that we are all properly and completely filling out our lead paint forms. And we're making sure in Dotloop that those are all being checked to be completely filled out. Let's go back to all. Right, rules, regs, and laws. There you go. To hit the
We have technical difficulties. Hold on. The audio's, I think, is going directly on. I think it's playing through there, right? Let's say.
Assuming the TV.
The buttons are on the other side.
You can move.
No. It's saying that it's connected through the HDMI. So it's going into this. It's over here.
Really hungry.
hear her vaguely. Can somebody else do that?
No, I think that's Renee's voicemail.
Oh, Renee.
You have great hearing.
I know, that is
I
pretty good.
couldn't,
How did you hear that?
She heard
I'm
I
impressed.
could hear that too.
Yeah.
Where does it say?
Yeah, but she's
I'm
down
good.
there. Well, you got, you know.
Just this area?
See right there. Click on that.
Oh, you think so?
Oh, there you go.
Oh.
Go to.
It's funny, all my students ask me a question, I think I'm very closer to them.
This cup keeps it cold for so many hours.
Cold and hot,
Yeah, I need to get one of those. I have a smaller one.
I have a Yeti one too, and I love it. It's like this thin all the way up.
Yeah, the one I have is like 16 ounces, but I want the big
Come
one.
through there.
Yeti cups.
We all have those.
What do you
Oh,
got,
I think-
Where did you get it?
Something
I
like
don't
that.
know,
but
Dan
they're
made
worth
them.
But it keeps it forever.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
saw
that's
one.
his
Someone's
wife did.
truck
To be
on fire,
honest.
and have, like,
I should
iced
ask if I could
coffee.
buy one.
And there was still ice in
But,
it after his
yeah,
truck.
I think you
Yeah.
just pop them
Commercial.
open and then that's
Yeah,
just
I'm
a
like literally,
decal,
I'm like,
the
yes, this is
layer.
why
Oh,
Yeti
it's
is so
a
expensive.
Yeah.
But that's not what these are. I think these are Alpine, but these are awesome too.
Yeah, they're huge. It barely fits my, like,
Oh, I
in the
cannot.
car, in my cup holder.
Yeah.
Oh, really? See, it fits in my cup holder, but I can't put it under my coffee thing, so.
So
I
we
Oh,
just
really?
told them to watch
I
it.
Yeah,
Get
I can
one.
see
I put
why.
a cup under it and I'll I fill it
Then
and
you
I'll
dump it in.
Yeah, right.
Are we back live? Or did we ever stop?
No, I just cut our.
All right, so the magic of technology. We back on audio.
Maybe not.
Wasn't me.
101, what you need to know to protect your clients and avoid fines on real estate sales or purchases. Overriding policy of the lead paint law is to encourage full disclosure of all lead paint related issues, and it inspires the opportunity to test for lead paint before they purchase a home with lead paint. Unlike rental properties, however, there is no obligation on the seller to actually de-lead prior to a private sale. But common sense dictates that a lead-free house may be more valuable and marketable, and this is particularly true for multifamily properties where tenants with children under 6 years of age may in any event trigger the de-leading requirement of law.
LAER University in Boston, LAER University.
Sellers and real estate agents that do not meet the requirements of the lead paint law can face a civil penalty of up to $1,000 under state law in Mass, and a civil penalty of up to $10,000, possible criminal to in addition, a real estate agent who does not meet requirements may be liable under the Massachusetts Consumer Protection of damages. By the way, under federal law, the penalty also includes the loss of a real estate license. Who needs to sign? Whenever an owner of a home built before 1978 sells, the listing agent must provide a proper transfer notification certification, and number 2, all 10 pages of the Department of Public Health Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention CLPP property for motive.
I hope we can all read really fast.
You can pause it and like make it.
Everybody, sorry for the technical issues here, but in order, if you want to go to this, you can go to lairuniversity.com or go in through Jostle, and when you get to Lair, go down to,
Training.
let me just
Agent
pull up
training,
the,
wasn't it?
it was agent training and then rules and
Rules,
laws, the
regulations
very
and laws,
bottom,
yeah.
yeah. and you'll be able to view the content there. So where do we find all these forms?
We're on page 14.
.loop. So if you go to .loop, you can type in and make sure you have the lead forms that are appropriate for what you're doing, whether it's a purchase or a rental. You can actually, and in the .loop class, we'll show you how you can actually create templates so that you don't have to go pick and find. How many people still pick and find all the different forms and check off?
Now I am.
Okay.
I need to make, you can make like your own,
Template.
yeah.
And that way, if you have a listing, you have a rental, you have a purchase, all you have to do is click on that template and copy all your documents over. It'll make it a lot easier than trying to go through the whole directory of forms. So.
And also, we have Patrick from Loop is coming from Cincinnati in middle of February, and he will be doing 7 classes, so we'll be learning a lot more on that.
Are they going to be doing the 7 the same the way he did it last time, or is it going to be?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yours are.
He did an awesome job. last
Very,
time.
very thorough, lots of tips and tricks.
Time when they say we're doing it together, yeah.
So.
Let's go random, the light roast, really like.
And I'm going to need Joe to come over here and fix the screen again.
Joe, are we on? One of the things that Stacy was saying, when you go back and review this wonderful webinar that she did on Lead Paint 101, is to remember to put the entire 11 pages, I think it was. That should all be included in .loop, not just the signature page. And that should also be included in the paperclip on MLS, the entire document.
Now, should you have them initial it saying, you know, like, I went over this with you, I'm giving you this to read as well, we're signing the single page that most people do. So should you have them initial the bottoms of the entire packet essentially?
Best practices, yes.
Yeah.
You can go back to where you were, the other tab.
I mean, it's
Oh, I
easy to
will in a
click
second.
through and initial something.
Right.
That's a good idea, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's best to cover your own butt.
Right.
You know, better safe than sorry, I suppose.
So if this particular form is not in there, I will get it to Kiki. Are you the one who handles the uploading?
Yes.
She's not in frame.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make sure to get you this document if it's not there, but
And now, so here's a question. So if you're representing the seller, obviously, and you have, you know, this whole 12 pages up in the clip in MLS, should you have the buyer initial it too, saying that, you know,
who do you represent?
if you're representing the seller and you've now provided this for the buyer's agent?
You do not want to have, that's the buyer's agent's responsibility.
Understandable.
It's not sending to the monitor, Joe.
So while we're doing that, we had a discussion. Always remember to look in Jocelyn discussions. There's a lot of interesting subjects that come up. And about a month ago, there was an agent who was selling a FSBO. And so her question was, do I still need a lead paint? So I chimed in on that and I said, the seller, now remember, the seller is the FSBO.
Yeah.
She was representing the buyer. But the seller still needed to fill out a lead paint form
Because it's mandatory.
and declare what he knew, and then her buyers would acknowledge receiving his information. But that was an interesting question.
Well, so does she have to provide that to this FSBO and say, listen, this is required by the state of Massachusetts,
Yeah,
I need you to
that's-
fill it out so that my buyer can acknowledge
right.
and sign?
Right.
Huh.
It's been, I've seen it happen where buyer agents have their buyers sign a blank form. I'm like,
Why?
what's the sense? You're not acknowledging anything that the seller said. You need to have what the seller of the home
Yeah, the seller
has
should provide
stated.
it.
Right.
So this form is in, just FYI, this is in .loop. It's called Protect Your Family from Lead. It's a brochure.
Is this just for their information? You don't need that to
So
sign, right?
it tells you, in the lead disclosure form, it says that you provided them with documentation. This is actually the documentation that it was intended to be used. So as far as best practices goes, do you have to have them initial anything? No, that's what the form's for. However, especially if they have small children, this is the form, and actually this is an older one. I have a newer one. I'll get Kate.
If they initial it though, it's saying that they read it basically, so that's.
Right, so what I come down and I have them add initials, and I can just tag it right there and then assign it to whomever.
On every page?
On every page.
How many pages?
I believe it's,
Reading 11 pages is much more satisfying than your child potentially dying. So I mean, if you can't take the time to read 11 pages, that's a
and when they get the email,
problem.
let's be realistic. If you got this email, you've got 40 pages to sign between the buyer agency, the lead paint, all the disclosure and everything. Are they reading it? No, but they're trusting that you went over and gave them the information.
Yeah.
This is 16 pages of lead is bad, don't eat it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, and on the form, they have to sign that you verbally informed them of the possible presence. So like
Correct.
you have to legally talk about it.
So in my buyer's packets, I send this out in every single buyer. This is part of my buyer packet. I put it in there to initial, but I put it as an option if they choose to. Great. It's not like they're physically doing it. They're just clicking a button. Next, next, next,
Yeah.
next, next, next.
Exactly.
So, but I'm providing, and I like using tech for it because now there's a record that they received it.
Yeah, and everything is
It's,
timestamped.
yeah, so they opened it, it's noted, and my butt's covered. Okay,
Thank you for
So-
sharing that.
yeah, so this is a form that's in there.
Again, it adds to your value proposition when you're representing a buyer to give that in your buyer packet. That's awesome.
So again, Susan touched on it, don't do a blank lead disclosure. Same thing with dual agency, so we should have covered this earlier, I apologize, it wasn't really in there, but dual agency disclosure, there's two different things. When you do the listing agreement or the buyer agency agreement, there's a box you check that says they do consent. What that's allowing them to do, or allowing you to do, is to show them properties that you may represent the other party on. It's not giving you permission to represent dual agency. That's when the second form comes in. So what some agents do is they have them check yes on the agency agreement, but then they also have them sign a blank disclosed dual agency form. Don't ever do that, because you're violating the rules there. That's not what that intention is for, because you have to know who both parties are, so you can identify them to your clients. Okay, so the screen's not following along. But
Is it the computer or is it this?
all right.
We're back.
Back in business.
So here's the state form, and it is on page 27. Thank you. For those watching on video or live stream, you can download this information also from Jostle. If you go under library, go under the 4-week program, you can download each day's manual directly from there. So, this form, okay, it's vital. I mean, does anybody have an extra $10,000 or whatever the fine is laying around to pay it? No? Okay. And this isn't something that errors and omissions covers.
So now, question, should you ever, I know you said don't provide like a blank one to your buyer to sign, but should you ever just show them a blank one and just go, like, just go over it with them and say, this is what you could potentially be looking at if you buy a house that was built before 1978?
So, in my buyer presentation, I provide a copy of every single document they're going to encounter.
Yeah.
Property disclosures, condo riders, lead paint, and I go over that as part of my buyer, and just so they're familiar with it, so that when it comes time, it's, oh yeah, I remember you telling me that.
Yeah.
As far as this form, like there was a talk about the for sale by owner. If you represent the buyer in a for sale by owner, these forms are copywritten. These are they're not available to the general public. These are for realtors.
Yeah.
So the for sale by owner probably isn't going to have this form. Now they may go down to Staples and buy the sell your home kit. So what I would do for myself is I would fill this out, have my client fill it out, and I would include it in my offer to the seller. I'm not advising them how to fill it out or what to do. It's their responsibility. But I would fill this out. Now, the property disclosure, obviously I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But for the lead disclosure, I would definitely fill one of these out if I represent the buyer and the seller didn't have representation.
Yeah.
And send it in. They can ask their attorney or whoever's assisting them.
So
Yeah.
you wouldn't have the buyer sign off on that
I would.
until the seller did disclose,
No.
no? You
I would
have them
still,
sign it
because
first?
one of the things has received copies, they can initial has received copies, or waive the opportunity to conduct, or put in the 10-day. So if you look down under I and FI and FII, underneath there, and I would just have them initial the 10-day and make that part of your offer that they get 10 days for the lead inspection.
Okay, you can put, yeah,
You can't, I mean,
opportunity.
don't fill anything up in that first A and B section, but make sure you have the appropriate thing filled out under sections C through F. And then make sure that when you initial, do not initial G. If you represent the buyer, do not initial G. That is only if you represent the seller, and vice versa. If you represent the seller, don't initial whether they're represented by, if they're represented by somebody else or no one at all. Don't fill that out, because then you're taking on responsibility that's not yours.
So you can initial C, D.
You wouldn't initial all of them, and it's not for you, it's for your client, but they initial, did they receive the notification?
Yeah, and then you only initial G or H, right? So seller or buyer is one or the
Correct.
other.
I mean, unless it's a dual agency.
So in
situation.
a dual agency, would you initial both G and H? Okay.
Yeah, because you represent both at that
Good
point.
to know.
So,
Oh, so if it's dual, that's what you're saying, initial both G and H?
right.
Okay.
But if you're only representing the seller, but a buyer came to you that didn't want to be represented,
Yeah.
then you don't do H.
Ah.
Clear as mud? Good.
Clear as mud.
So tenant lead law, one thing I really want to stress on this, and this is a hefty fine for discrimination. I think it's $25,000. Section 8, you cannot discriminate or deny somebody on the basis of that, especially, so there's another instructor, real estate instructor, who is in Western Massachusetts, whose ex-wife had a rental property, and she knew it had lead in it, and didn't want to bring it up to whatever the Section 8 requirements were. So she had a simple rule. She wasn't gonna,
Oh,
You can't.
and you can't do that. And, you know, in Massachusetts, if you have a property for rent, it's Section 8. You can't discriminate. Now, you can find out the reasons why they may not want to rent to them, but you can't use the lead paint, and you can't say it's because you don't want to bring it up to code.
It could only be like credit or income.
Yeah, or
Like if they didn't, if they didn't really.
right, if you
qualify
had
necessarily.
other reasons, but if you had two equal people, you
Yeah.
couldn't say, well, this person's Section 8, so that's why I'm going with this person who's not.
Well, so then I guess what do you do in that situation when you have two people that are essentially equal that want the same apartment and one of them is Section 8? Because, like, how do you choose at that point?
Be,
You're put in a tough
be appreciative
position.
you're not your client. Say, I can tell you that, you know, what's your recommendation to them? If they're equally qualified, I'm gonna say you probably better go with the Section 8. I
Because
mean,
they could come back and say that's
Yeah.
why you said no.
right,
So I guess it's such a tough position to be put in. Being a landlord in Mass is like, the rule book is like this
It's
thing.
horrible. I was in the 80s and
Yeah.
stuff like this, that we sold everything the end of the 80s and said, thank you.
Yeah.
yeah, it's not for me.
I was,
I
I
don't
was,
wanna get into
I was in
it,
housing
so-
court so many times and I did everything right.
Do you wanna get into rentals?
Oh, yeah, I wanna like own 20 units by the time I'm 30.
But
Like
I'm in New
that.
Hampshire.
So the other
Yeah.
thing is,
Yeah.
if you're listing a property and the owner tells you that he has the lead decertification certificate, we had an instance of this recently, all the way up till the day of the closing, told the agent he had it, and
Provided.
he never provided it.
Now, is that something that you should include on the MLS, or is that something that, like, once it goes under agreement, essentially, you should be like, hey, this, like, when do you provide that to the buyer?
Obviously, there's a contradiction of disclosure. If you're putting in the MLS that it has been de-leaded because he said so, and yet he never, it was just one instance, but
Well,
I'm just saying.
So
you
if
need
he
to have-
actually provided that to you as an agent and said upfront, like, before you listed it, hey, like, here's the certificate, as an agent, when do you provide that to a potential buyer's agent? Would you put it in the MLS if you have it?
I
Or
would
would
put
you-
it in, if you already had it, I would already put it in MLS as an attachment.
Yeah, okay.
So they're gonna ask for it anyways.
Exactly, so
It's
is it
a
just
positive.
easier to just put it out there to
Absolutely.
begin with, so that if people know there's no, oh, I didn't read that, or
Right,
whatever.
so as a listing agent, what's our primary job?
The best interest of your soul.
To sell the house, right? For the most money possible and as quickly as possible. If you can put together a listing packet, for example, my listing packet, when I do my listings, it'll have the disclosure, it'll have the lead paint, it'll have the deed, it'll have map, it'll have the photos. So basically I take the photo sheet from the MLS, save it as a PDF, and then I put all of it together into one packet, and I even include the comps I use. Now, a lot of people don't include the comps, but I also know that there's a lot of realtors out there who are lazy. And if I can provide my comps, I'm not disclosing anything, putting anybody at a disadvantage. In my opinion, I'm giving them stuff that if they say, oh, I think they're off on this. All right, well, here are the comps.
Credibility
So-
right there, yeah.
And then when it comes to the appraisal, all I have to do is print that off and give it to the appraiser as well when I meet him. So I put all of that in with my listing, and
So you essentially put your CMA up there.
basically I don't put the spread or anything, but I
Yeah,
put the
but-
comps I used and the explanation, because I don't want somebody coming back and saying, well, I think he overprices by $15,000.
It's like, well, this is where I got my pricing from.
Yeah, and you know, there's some agents out there that are not gonna take the time, and they're just gonna say, well, I think that we could go in at whatever. This way it kind of weeds out some of that. And I'm not having to worry about whether or not the information's getting back to them. So I put in more than probably most agents do.
But it's best to cover your own butt and just say, I over disclosed everything I knew. You can't say you didn't know.
Yeah. And I also, I mean, I provide my seller clients with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So if they say, oh, I don't want you to put that up there, okay, well, this is the reason why I do it, but if you tell me not to, then I won't.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can, then great. So page 31 has the tenant. So there is two separate forms. There's one for rentals, there's one for buyers or sellers. So make sure you use the right form. The other thing that's really important for those that are in New Hampshire and practicing in New Hampshire, there is a buyer and seller agency form for both traditional and for designated. So make sure you use the right forms, because there's going to be homework. Something new this time around is that we've added homework. So we're going to want to go into .loop. Everybody complete the agency disclosure, the disclosed dual agent. We'll go back and cover that because I don't know how we skipped over that somehow before break, but we'll go over that form real quick. Complete a lead paint property transfer, and then provide the sample consumer, which I just showed you guys where it was, right? We all know where that is in .loop now.
This is in the packet.
And again, if you listen to Stacy's module on that, that'll help a lot.
Now, are we doing this from the seller's point, or like filling these out from the seller's point or the buyer's point? Like agency wise?
What do you want to do?
Let's do seller.
Let's do seller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do it from the seller's point of view.
What is that page in here?
Oh, you just
Yeah.
passed it out.
This one?
So the
Oh, yeah, with the big blue thing. 16, okay.
On page 16.
is that the dual?
Yep, on 16. Oh, they look for the homework page.
Oh, that's not. I'm looking for the disclosed dual agent.
Oh, it's in the beginning.
So for those of you in Acushnet or wherever, the homework page that is on the screen right now is on page 16.
13. It's for the dual agents. You're welcome.
Now we're going back to the dual agency page, which is on page 13.
And you have both the buyer and seller obviously sign this.
Correct. You need to have both parties sign.
And then you just circle who's who underneath.
Yep.
You'd think that they
It's-
would just say buyer, seller. So now my question is with this, what happens when you have like a couple that is like the sellers and they both need to sign? Like, it's best to have all signatures, but
I would do two of these forms.
just two of them, okay. And have the
And I
buyer
would do the
sign both.
buyer on one and the seller on the other.
Oh, I see, so buyer, buyer, seller, seller.
And
Right.
I would add in,
Have each one initial either page.
thank you, yeah, I was gonna say, I would have add in at the bottom, you know, one of two and initials so that there's
Yeah.
a record of. The trick is you have somebody come to an open house unrepresented and it's your listing. And they say, oh, can you write up the offer, we want to be represented. Can you immediately say yes? No, you have to say, I have to check with my seller, make the phone call and say, I have somebody that's not represented that wants me to represent them and wants to put in an offer. Do you go over the dual agency? Do you consent to it? Yes, great, I'll send you the form. Then you can have the buyer sign and then have the seller sign.
Okay.
But just because somebody comes to the open house and says, I want you to represent me,
Doesn't mean you can.
doesn't mean you can. You have to get permission from both parties. So make sure you have that before you, because if you have the buyer fill out this form and then just assume that the seller's going to, you could have egg on your face.
But that's a point topic, because, the word represent to me would mean that you were taking them as a client versus just writing the offer as a customer.
Right, so as a customer, you don't have to have this form.
Right.
This is only if they say, I want to have the benefits of having a realtor.
But even as a dual agent, you're kind of like,
You negate your benefits of having that realtor.
so it's,
So I'm not gonna say yay or nay on dual agency. That's personal preference, you know, that's what you choose it to be. I personally very rarely will practice it. Usually it's only in family situations because I'm going to get yelled at regardless. So, yeah. So, but if you're going to do it, you have to make sure that everybody agrees to it and don't make any assumptions, because both buyers and sellers can kind of be funny. And by funny, I mean dumb. So, I love all buyers and sellers, but I had a client, and this isn't really dual agency, but this is kind of goes to the point of sometimes they don't make sense. So I had a seller, actually it was in Manchester, and we were $1,000 away, $1,000 away. This was probably 3 years ago, so the market wasn't what it has been. $1,000 away. I talked to the buyer's agent. I say, hey, look, why don't we just eat the 500 each, get this deal done? The house had been on the market for almost 60 days. Said, no problem. I went back to my seller, said, great news. You're going to be made whole. This is how it's going to look on the closing documents. You're good to go. Over my dead body. It is principal. I am not, this house is worth that $1,000. Would not sign.
Oh my goodness.
So I had to go back to the agent, say, it's just not going to happen. Sorry. They went and found a nice house. About 60 days later, the seller calls me and says, all right, I'll take that deal. Nope. It's not the way it works. So don't make any assumptions that they're going to be, oh, you're bringing me a buyer? No problem. So.
And the other point, back to what Renee was just saying, remember that your duties are limited in buyer-customer versus buyer-client. So that's the big difference when we were talking about dual agency.
Yeah, a customer does not get old cars. It's weird. So, the other thing with, what popped into my head there a second ago? See it?
No problem. So I have a question. So how does disclosure work then with the customer? As like I mean, you're supposed to disclose everything you know anyway.
Latent defects.
What do you mean?
A latent defect is something that's obvious. If you walk into a house and you see that there's a hole with water dripping, you can disclose there's a water leak. Okay? You have to be honest and fair and disclose. So my rule of thumb is I'll provide you with the property disclosure. If it's not on the property disclosure, I have no way of knowing. And after looking at 2 or 3 houses without a buyer agency and them hearing, I don't know the answer to that. They're either one going to say, well, why do I have you? And that gives me the opportunity to sell myself and my services again. Or 2, they're going to say, well, give me the damn buyer agency so I can sign it already and you can answer my questions.
But even if it's not on the disclosure, like say you're at the house and there's a disclosure, but you now notice that the water heater is actively leaking.
Yeah.
You let the seller know immediately, but now you've got to disclose this. It's obvious.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, that's...
So basically,
if I walked
for a
into
client, it's things that are less obvious that you have to just.
Well,
That may be more than just what you see.
If anybody, whether it's a client or not, but if anybody sees something black growing on the wall and says, "Is that mold?" I don't know. It's microbial growth, speech impediment, and usually that's the response I get. Right.
You need to hide,
Right.
because they don't know either.
Exactly. So
They're not experts. They're professionals, not experts in everything.
So, I got a lot of stories. I live in Goffstown, New Hampshire, and there's a pig farm. And it's about a quarter mile from my house, just beyond the smell. I'm safe there. However, the house immediately across the street and up to recently sold. The customer asked their agent, do we have to worry about this pig smell? What was their response?
I don't know.
Yeah, like, I don't know.
Their response was, no, you're uphill.
What? Honey, wind.
So, in his defense, when he got called before the commission, in his defense was downwind. It wasn't downwind, it was upwind.
You get sued?
Yeah, he got sued.
Wow.
Because guess what? come the spring, they had to worry about the
Yeah.
pig
Oh,
smell.
yeah.
So,
Best to say
So-
no.
disclosure.
Oh.
Sometimes, when I bought my house, I was a brilliant firefighter, okay? And got into the basement. Everything's on pallets. I turned to my realtor, said, "Why is it on pallets?" She looked at me, didn't hesitate, said, "Oh, it's probably to make it easier for her to move." The fact that there was a 45-degree pitch staircase and a bulkhead never crossed my mind, never crossed her mind. The reason everything was on pallets is because there's a water feature in the basement.
Indoor pool.
Was it an unfinished basement?
That was sarcasm.
Flat-
Sorry.
it's flat.
I had water issues in the basement. I just prefer to call them water features. so yeah. So come the next month. Yeah, next month I had a koi pond and so.
So I'll give you another one. The town of Dunstable, anybody familiar with Dunstable? Dunstable, and I'm just oversimplifying the story, but Dunstable became a protected farming town a couple of years ago.
A right to farm town.
Right, and so you cannot ever make a complaint about the cow smell or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Now, if you were an agent from Tewksbury showing in Dunstable for the first time, you might not have any knowledge of this.
Yeah,
You know, how,
Drake, it's a right to
Yeah.
farm. You have to present, well, you should present the disclosure of the right to farm town when somebody is buying in Drake it, because you can't complain
Right.
about what people are growing outside in their
so
yards.
should that be a
I don't think so.
paperclip on your listing in MLS if you're in a,
If you're
right to
listing in
farm?
Drake it,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's a good way to cover it, I think.
Yeah,
I even had a listing in Tewksbury, so there's a pig farm in Tewksbury, my very first year in real estate. And I didn't know the proximity of this house to the pig farm. And so I listed it, and, but I even said to him, you know, when I listed it, I said, is there anything about the property that's not visible that I should know that might impact the sale? And he said no, and even on the disclosure, it was a field in the disclosure, and it said, no, there's nothing. So, we weren't getting any action on the listing. Of course, the buyer's agents were well aware of the proximity, and, it became an issue. And, he wanted a meeting with my broker and all this other stuff, and basically it ended up coming down to, I should have known as the professional, but the broker pretty much said, you as the homeowner should have disclosed it. It was, you've lived in this house, wasn't a rental
yeah.
or anything, and, this was something, so, and that became a topic of what, you know, what an agent should know and what they're required to know, you know, is the perception of people.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to know if it's a right to farm
Okay.
area?
You can
So-
look it up.
What is
So
it in the deed? Where do you find it?
Well, now I ended up having to change the listing drastically and disclosing the proximity, which ironically then it sold. Paige Cadigan sold it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but,
Well,
it was
so
interesting.
Then that poses the question where you're like, is there anything I should know that should affect the sale of this home? And if it wasn't a problem to the seller, I could see them saying, no, not at all. But now a buyer comes in and has an issue with it, like conservation land being behind your home. You've never had flooding, anything like this, it was never a problem to the people that own the house. A buyer comes in and that's all they can focus on. I literally just had this happen.
So preview to Monday. I'm gonna go into Code of Ethics. Monday's Code of Ethics. This is probably my biggest passion in real estate. It's Article 2-1. A realtor shall be obligated to discover and disclose adverse factors reasonably apparent to someone with experience in those areas required. Okay, that's where our Code of Ethics come into play. Code of Ethics mean more to me than any state law. Usually most state laws are based off of the Realtor Code of Ethics, just FYI. But let me get used to scrolling on this. This is where I get a lot of rub from people.
I just did the ethics training, so I can log in our office.
So there's a new one coming out, or effective today. 1-7 changed. So I just sent out the email. It'll probably go out this afternoon. But 1-7 preview here. Now, as a listing agent, if a buyer's agent asks you in writing, sends you an email, says, did you present my offer? You are now obligated to answer that question. Prior to today, you did not have to answer that question. As of today in 1-7, they put in that if a buyer's agent asks in writing, did you present, you have to say yes or no, my client has decided not to entertain any other offers. If you put that, you better have the disclosure or the addendum to the listing agreement that says that the seller does not want to receive any further offers.
And that's
It's
adopted.
you can do, yeah. There's addendums. It's not an addendum specific to that. It's just a
Is it the addendum
addendum.
with like the breakdown on it that you can choose
Choose
from multiple
different.
options? Yeah, it's like purchase and sales or whatever.
All right. So I'm gonna say. So I teach buyer agency and seller agency the designation classes for NAR. And Article 11, I get so much pushback on because agents are like, well, that's not the way I've done it. Well, guess what?
Be familiar with the area where the subject property is located.
So, just because you have a license in Massachusetts does not mean you should be selling anywhere in Massachusetts just because you can. Okay? Like you said, if you had a listing in Cape, you know what? I'd much rather take 25% of something than have to pay a fine to the commission, or worse yet, risk my realtor status. So what it says is, one, you have to be familiar with the area. So the question asked was, well, how would we know if there was a right to farm town? You wouldn't. Story warning. There's 2 lessons to be learned in this story. So I had a client, it was a Realtor.com lead, buyer lead. They wanted to look in Bow, New Hampshire, which is part of the area I service. And no, they were moving from Franklin. I said, guys, I gotta be honest with you, I don't know anything good about Franklin. FYI, going forward, I learned to take the word good.
I was just
Ow.
gonna say, that's a really bad thing to say.
Yeah, so.
They're like, we're
Yeah.
yeah, then they're now offended.
Yeah, so they had a good laugh at it because they agreed. They didn't know anything good about their town either. That's why they were moving.
They had a sense of humor.
Right. But I said, I don't know anything about Franklin, but I'll gladly find you an agent in my office. At the time, I was with another firm that had an office in Franklin. I said, I'll gladly find you an agent in Franklin. And if it's okay, I'd like to tag along with them because I want to see what you're living in so I can better help you find what you're looking for. And I drove up and had the agent, they did their CMA, and I had done one because I'm sick and I like doing CMAs. Seriously, yeah, I mean, I do 5 to 10 a week, so just on random houses. So we go up there, my CMA was almost the same exact thing as what hers was, and at the end, they're like, hey, Eric, can you stay back for a minute? I was like, sure, whatever. They're like, she's a dead fish. We don't, not a good fit, okay? So I said, well, look, they said, will you take our listing? I said, I can take it, but I need you to understand, I'm not familiar with, I don't know if it's going to take a week or a year to sell your property. They said, we completely understand that. So in Article 11, it does say you can take a listing outside of your normal area as long as you're licensed in the area and appropriately, but you have to disclose that up front. And that's the key. So there's a lot of people who are like, nope, if you have a pre-qual letter, I've got gas, let's go. It's fine. If that's the way you want to do your business, that's your choice. Myself, there's very few markets that I want to be in. They're within my reasonable driving distance, and I can tell you what houses are going for, what the little weird laws are for each town, and all of that. So, and I have no problem referring out, you know, I don't care if it's one town outside of my area, I'll find an agent that's competent. So when it comes to what do we do, how do we know your market. Who was it? You were saying earlier that you're going to focus on Lowell.
Yeah.
You know, that's great. You know, it may not be your hometown,
Yeah.
but it's where you're going to focus, put your energy. That's fantastic. I have a friend who's in Manchester. His focus is in 03104, which is the north end of Manchester. He can tell you every single house that's sold. He walks those neighborhoods. People know him. How he's 26 years old, and he's phenomenal. So some people have the shotgun approach. If that's your approach, go for it. Some people live in less sparsely populated areas. You know what? You're going to have a wider swatch of area to hit. But Article 11 does cover how do you know what it is. The other big thing is if you're a New Hampshire agent going to Mass or a Mass agent going to New Hampshire, we're fortunate enough that we only have 2 MLSs, NARN and an MLS PIN.
Yeah.
There are some towns, St. Louis, Missouri, they have 12. They may have consolidated. At one point, they had 12 MLSs for one city.
So my question
Wow.
is, how does that benefit any single person in the real estate industry because none of you are seeing all the same thing?
It's above my pay grade.
Like, that's insane to me. Because
Yeah.
what are you gonna do, belong to all 12?
Well, you would have to.
Oh my
If
God,
it's
you
insanity.
you would have to. So if you're a Mass agent going into New Hampshire, make sure you're a member of NARN, and if you're a New Hampshire agent coming down here, make sure you're a member of MLS PIN. You can list them in both, and I strongly recommend you do because
Yeah.
there's buyers on both sides.
New Hampshire
Right.
stuff in MLS, even if you're.
Right. But as a New Hampshire agent, when I get a buyer lead that says, well, the MLS number is 71 blah, 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 I'm like, it's MLS PIN. I do have access to it, but most agents won't have access to it. Most agents will touch the little go to jail button on NARN and send a complaint, and then you're gonna get an email that you have to respond to within 4 hours or face penalties. So if you're a Mass agent, join both and list in both. If you're a New Hampshire agent, join both, list in both. But make sure you're listing in the one that's predominant to that area. Some could argue, hey, if it's Salem, New Hampshire, you could go both. If it's Wyndham, you could go either one. I just think
Right,
that,
you do it to an extent, like, just Southern New Hampshire can be listed in Mass, like Pelham, Wyndham, Nashua. Like, you go up to North Conway, what's the point?
well, true. Well, now I would argue North Conway,
North Conway,
because you got the
that's
secondary.
Yeah, right.
Right, so
Well, you know
Lakes
what I mean.
region. I hear what you're saying, and I see that complaint, or that argument, but MLS PIN still is not the dominant MLS for the area, and you won't have a full picture of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
There's a lot of agents that are not licensed in Mass to have that access either. So if you have a listing in New Hampshire, you're missing out on all this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're just doing yourself a disservice if you don't belong to both.
and it's $63 a quarter.
Oh, that's not bad, it's cheaper than MLS.
63 on top of the 87, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's 2
because
different.
Yeah, right.
it's two, and with that you get benefits. I know it's it's 11:15. Hi,
We're still
Stacy
recording.
just joined us.
So now I have a question with the whole like dually licensed Mass and New Hampshire. So like I belong to NARN and Mass. So
Yep.
if I get licensed in New Hampshire, do I now have to join a New Hampshire Realtor Board
That's-
to be a realtor still in New Hampshire?
No, so that's a really common question. You do have to use the New Hampshire forms, you have to join the New Hampshire Association of Realtors,
Okay.
which I think is $137, I think,
All year?
a year.
Oh, wow.
That,
So it's significantly lower than belonging to.
right, now you can choose to join a local board as well,
Yeah.
but even if you're in Massachusetts, so you belong to NAER and MAR and NAR. So you could go, say you decided that you were gonna start working in Boston and you wanted to join BAR,
Yeah.
you could join them for just whatever their association fee is. If you came into New Hampshire, you could join if you wanted the benefit, but you have to weigh what the benefit of joining that association is. The state association, join that one.
For forms and things like
Right,
that.
for forms. The other thing is New Hampshire, when you become a realtor in New Hampshire and you join the state association, you get Inman Select for free, which is $299.
Yeah.
Far covers your cost of dues. You don't have to pay the national again. So
Oh,
none of the local, I mean, other than free CEUs, none of the local boards really offer any added features
that you probably couldn't get it near.
that you couldn't, right. So joining a local board in New Hampshire,
Well,
isn't.
NAER does CEs for New Hampshire anyway. So I mean, if you belong to NEAR, you might as well just do both classes for MA in New Hampshire.
Right.
You have to.
Except for
Here.
the court. The
Oh.
court, I mean, it does do that class separately. But in most classes that you take, you get credit for both.
Yeah.
Right.
The core is separate.
Makes sense.
So, but that's a great question. I don't think a lot of people understand. You can be licensed in multiple states, but you still have to join the state board.
It's just not
You,
local.
right, you don't have to join the local.
Makes sense.
So,
We had a problem with your wonderful video, the Lead Paint 101.
it was buffering for some reason.
really?
So.
Yeah.
I can stop by, so.
No, I know, but
But it would be
just for a second.
New Hampshire's.
And we
state
told
license.
everybody
It's not
to
in
look at
Monterey,
that.
it's what- well, Massachusetts.
Can we all pull out the
So it would be the
lead
state
paint
license.
page again?
And
Yeah.
that's NHS.
Which is page 27. We have a Cushnet live on the
Yeah, that's what I meant.
broadcast as well.
Oh, I like your. Is it a dress? Is that what it is?
No, it's a shirt.
Why can't you tell me pants?
It's my pajamas.
Just got out of bed.
So we have a surprise
I'm a
guest.
male.
Forget all these things are called.
So again, when you get a chance, go into Jostle in the library to LAER University and listen to Stacy's module on Lead Paint 101, which is about 15 minutes long.
So
Page 27.
all I will say about the lead paints, a couple of things. First of all, one of our goals this year is that last year we made it our mission, our New Year's resolution a year ago was to make sure 100% of our files were totally compliant. Up until then, we really left it up to the real estate agents we trusted that the files were compliant. Starting in January of last year, we said we're gonna check and make sure every file is compliant. So the result of that is that when a deal closes, you fill out your check request and the administrators are on notice that a deal is coming through, that an agent is gonna be looking to get paid. And then they go through the file and make sure that you have your agency disclosure, your purchase and sale agreement, like the stuff that's required. The one thing that gets kicked back a lot is that the lead paint is not filled out properly. Couple of things I will say about the lead paint, and they probably already covered it, but so lead paint is a disclosure that typically you're signing or asking clients to sign like at an offer stage. So the listing agent is supposed to make that document available to you so that your buyer can sign off on the lead paint. However, I think lead paint is so serious that it should be a conversation that you're having like initially, like when you first sit down with a buyer, letting them know what the lead paint law is. That's why I always say, like, even though you don't have to have that form signed until you're writing up an offer, it is a conversation you should be having way in advance of ever writing up an offer so that a potential buyer knows what the consequences of buying a property with lead paint are. Like, there's significant consequences. So what I will say is that definitely take the time to read through of all the different documents that you're working with. Take the time to read through that lead paint disclosure, the multi-page, I think it's 10 pages. Read through that disclosure so that you understand what the law is. And then I feel like the form is simple, it's self-explanatory, but I can't tell you the number of times real estate agents just click through, like they skip over. And oftentimes it's not necessarily the buyer agent's fault. That's one of the pieces that you have to learn to push back sometimes, because it is a listing agent that is having this form filled out first. So I'd say in the number of instances, and every month, I'm gonna say we have 20 to 30 out of 200 plus closings that get kicked back where before closing, an agent finds out we can't pay you on this transaction until we have a corrected lead paint in our file. So I'd say most of the time that there is an issue, it is that the listing agent, who is not necessarily our company, a listing agent had the form filled out improperly, and our agent just had it signed the way it was. And so that's where you have to be able to get good at reading the form and saying, did this listing agent have the form filled out properly? And if they didn't, you got to kick it back and say, we received the form, but it's not filled out properly. Here's what you have to correct. Then send it back and we'll have our buyer sign it. Because that's usually the issue. That's the other reason why we recorded that quick video. Because that quick video is an awesome link that you can just share with a listing agent from anywhere, KW, Coldwell Banker, and say, hey, so we have to educate the other side, saying, hey, by the way, this form is not filled out properly. Can you get it filled out correctly? Send it back. And because I always say to the other side, we're not just protecting our butts, we're protecting theirs too. So it's in their best interest to make sure that the form is filled out correctly. I feel like it's self-explanatory. I would say that just read it carefully. If it says initial, initial. If it says check, check. And make sure that the seller and the purchaser initial or check each of the areas that they are supposed to, and sign it at the bottom, and you guys have to sign it at the bottom. I will say our mission for 2019, and we've been working with the admin staff, is that we are going to get good at checking these at the beginning of the transaction instead of waiting until the closing date to say, hey, you're missing a document. Because I will say that we've had instances where once a deal's closed and the other side has gotten paid, they're not interested in helping you get a lead paint disclosure signed correctly at that point. So, any questions on lead paint? It's a no. I think it's a no-brainer if you read through the lead paint law. But again, when we go over like buyer agency and going through a buyer agency presentation, my guess is that 1 out of every 30 real estate agents, in my guess, 1 out of every 30 real estate agents talks about lead paint when they first sit down with a buyer. And it's really important. Like if somebody's buying a property with lead paint, whether they have a child that could potentially be harmed by lead paint, they're probably going to want to sell the property someday, and they're agreeing to do certain things to that property. So I think it's a good idea that you at least educate the buyer way in advance, give them that disclosure so that they can read through it and ask any questions they have about potential lead paint. Yep.
So how are you supposed to know? I know a lot of people put unknown for the lead paint, but how are you supposed to know if there's lead paint besides the flaking? Like, do they give you a document saying, hey, this has lead paint?
So first of all, almost, I would say 80 to 90% of the time it's going to be unknown. Okay. If you go to the website, however, there is properties that have had lead paint issues are on file on the state website, so you could do initial search there.
That's the only way to know, really?
Yeah, either testing it or going to the site.
And if it was before 70
if I can just say, for those that go into New Hampshire, there is a box and it asks, there's a line where you can fill in and you can put in age of house. That's what you'll see often is based on age of house. And the thing is, the box is not aware of any, but there may be, and reason or how you know is age of house. So, I know it's not on this one, but.
The other thing is that I know we're going to do a whole section, I don't think you've covered it yet, on like equal housing and HUD rules. You cannot decline an offer because somebody has asked for a property to be tested for lead paint. So just a snag that potentially you could get into, because if an offer comes through and somebody says we want to have the property tested for lead paint, you cannot decline the offer for that reason You could decline an offer for other reasons, but you cannot decline an offer because they want to have lead paint. And then if they do have it tested for lead paint, now you have disclosure issues. Yep.
So would the buyer in that case pay for that?
Yes. They have to pay for it, but still it opens up potential can of worms if there is lead paint. So
with
Can't say
that,
unknown anymore.
yeah.
Right.
So with that, if the buyer says, okay, I want to do a lead paint inspection, whatever, and it comes back that there's lead paint, does the seller now have to remediate that, or is that the buyer's responsibility? Like, who does that fall on, I suppose?
So the seller at least has to disclose that they have lead paint.
Now that they know,
Yes.
but they don't have to necessarily remediate it to sell the home?
Not necessarily, no.
The landlord would have to if it was a tenant.
Yes.
Yeah, but if it was just like your average seller for a
Right.
residential home, they could just say,
Yes.
okay, now we know,
Yeah,
I'm
now
gonna
we
fix my
have to-
lead disclosure.
Yes.
But I'm not fixing anything.
Correct.
It's up to you as the buyer.
Correct.
Okay.
So I just think that if buyers are aware of lead paint, I mean, I've purchased properties with lead paint when I had a child that was 3 years old. As long as they understand what the repercussions of having a property with lead paint.
Yeah. Don't let your kid chew on your
Yeah,
windowsill.
exactly. So
Or chew on the corner of your wall.
yeah.
Yeah.
So at least, and I think that you can use it as a tool to differentiate yourself from every other real estate agent. Because if somebody's sitting with you and you're spending the time to educate them on what lead paint is, and instead of like springing a form on them, like right when they're writing up an offer, oh, by the way, this property might have lead paint, so just sign right here. And
And
they're
they're
like,
like, well,
yeah.
we never talked about that.
Right.
Why? How do you know that? You know,
Right.
and then you can go, well, it was built before 78.
Right.
It's this, it's this.
So
that's really great because I actually went over with them the lead paint brochure that's in .loop, and I explained that that's how I do my buyer
Oh, you
agency
do?
presentation.
Oh, that's awesome.
So-
Yeah.
so-
I feel that's rare. I feel like most agents don't do that. I think it's fantastic if you do that.
I prefer rare over odd duck.
Yes. Yes. No, I think it's because it's no big deal. Everybody's supposed to do it, so you might as well talk about it in advance before they're signing an offer on something, and
so-
because that's when it freaks them out.
It's better to address it up front than all of a sudden trying to play catch up. And then
Yes.
Yeah, you almost want to like
Yeah.
not overload them at first, but be like, these are all the potential things that
Yes.
we could run into, especially in New England where we have so many older homes
Yes.
that are built in the 17 and 1800s
Yes.
because
100%.
we're such an old
And,
state.
and it gives them time. Like, I don't think a ton of people, like I said, I've purchased properties when I had a young child in Lowell, and as long as people know about it, then they can start talking to like their friends and neighbors, and their neighbors are like, yeah, I have a child living in a property with lead paint. We don't let them chew.
I mean,
Yeah.
almost everybody.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you
Yes.
remediate it?
I did not.
No.
Nope.
Just careful.
I was careful, and then I eventually sold the property, and that person, it was disclosed that I don't know whether or not it had lead paint, but it was an old
Did
home,
that make
so
it hard to sell it, or no?
no,
just like any
because
other
it's so
transaction,
common.
right.
I think, and definitely, like you said, it's so common.
Right.
Most properties. That's why I didn't disclose that it definitely had lead paint, but my guess is most properties built prior to 1978 have lead paint. I will also say that when you go to get quotes for painting, it's very different too. Because it's not like, if I were to go have this room painted, it would be one price, whereas if the house was built before 1978 and there was lead paint, because they have to wear like asbestos
Like
suits,
hazardous
yeah.
suits,
They have to rope off the area.
It's a good
Same with
business
outdoor.
plan.
Yeah.
So now if they do that, is that them remediating it, or is that completely separate from, like, would you have it remediated and then painted, or do some companies do both?
I'd say some do both, but I remember like having quotes on the exterior of the house. Like I know that my old property was remediated, at least on the outdoors, not necessarily on the indoors, because I had the whole outdoor painted. But it was a big deal. Like they roped off the area, came in hazmat suits, and
Yeah, well, they have to control the dust and
Yeah.
things that come with it.
yes. So it's like a whole. And then it also brings into question, like make sure you have a contractor that's doing it the right way. 'Cause some
Yeah.
don't. They just come in and start.
And you have to make sure that they're like you know, special people that can
Yes.
do the remediation, because if it
Mhm.
comes back that like, oh, they're not certified to do whatever,
Right.
you know, then you just opened up another can of worms, because now there's, you know, lead paint
Correct.
that has been shaved off your walls by someone who shouldn't
Yes.
have done it.
Would it be illegal to have someone that's not licensed? Like to do it?
They're not supposed to do it.
So it would fall
Okay.
on them.
Yeah,
But
so-
essentially they're lying to you about it.
Because they know they have to go through, because I think there's some sort of permit, I don't remember exactly,
Yeah,
but there was there was, I just hired a guy that I called out of the phone book, and there was like a certain procedure he had to go through, because it was built before 1978, so.
I'd like to extend this one bit further into something non-lead that's probably gonna be coming down the pipe pretty soon, and everybody in this room has had to deal with it, I'm sure. Disclose radon up front and go over what radon is, because when you wait till the home inspection, you get the water test results, it's a $1,500 to $3,500 fix, depending on whether it's air and water or water. But if you give them some insight up front, it's not this scary green monster that's gonna kill you. Well, maybe it's gonna kill you. But
There's a better way to put it.
it's not a scary green monster, how's that? So, but if you go over it, I have not had a single or seen anybody that's had anything come back without a high radon in the water, in New Hampshire at least, and I'm sure Mass is the same way. You guys get that back and all of a sudden you're worried about your deal falling apart. If you have that conversation up front, one, you look like you're a psychic to your client, because now you're telling them and you're providing them, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, just so you know, I appreciate you coming in, having this time with me. One of the things we may encounter, lead paint, go through the brochure, and then also the other thing that's very common in our area, being a granite foundation in most areas, is radon. It's a dangerous gas that causes cancer after years and years of exposure. You're gonna get a test. If it does come back positive, it's something we can go back and negotiate on. Worst case scenario, if this is your house and it's in the water, you're probably looking at $1,500 to $2,000 to get it mitigated. If it's in the water and air, you're probably looking at $3,500 to $4,000. But we can cross that bridge when we get there. I just want to make sure you're aware that it's on the map before we get there.
They have the option to do it or not though, right? The radon test?
Yeah, it's not a requirement.
Some
So
home inspectors will just do it as part of their home inspection.
if you do a water test, most water tests will have that part of the overall.
So I'm raising my hand. In one of the chapters of Stacy's book, How to Hire a Lion, we discuss pre-listing inspections. So this is part of your value proposition as a listing agent, to explain to the seller that these are things that could be tested, so that the seller is aware ahead of time if there are any problems.
So now I've been advised against that from some agents, saying that you're basically opening yourself up to potential problems. Because now everything you find at that pre-listing home inspection, you have to disclose. And that, you know, I guess you can see it from both sides. As a seller, you may not want to find that out because maybe you didn't know.
I've got a story.
So I've seen it on both sides. I mean, obviously as a buyer's agent, you want them to do the home inspection, you want them to know. But I guess from the seller side, I've been told like to avoid it because
It's 6 one, half dozen the other.
yeah.
There is value in it, especially if it's a high-end home. If it's a $100,000 fixer-upper,
You're gonna find problems.
you're gonna find problems. However, there was an agent in our office who had a house go under agreement, home inspection, deal fell through. Disclosed, they were able to disclose what the home inspection found, went under agreement, home inspection, fell through for completely different things. Went under agreement a third time, third home inspection, fell through, even with the previous 2 disclosed.
So you're just basically stacking up these problems that home inspectors are finding in different situations.
But that's interesting.
More so is because the home inspectors
They do different work.
Right.
They're looking, they
So-
overlook things or find something else.
We're gonna sell our condo this year or next year, and I plan to have a home inspection before I put it on the market. And my strategy with that is to show the inspection, and then anything that comes up, show paid receipts showing that we had the inspection, but we also took care of everything.
Well, and I suppose that's different. If you're gonna do it and take care of the problems, then that's one thing. You know, if your sellers wanna do that and they're willing to pay out whatever it is to fix this problem, versus, you know, they're spending 10 grand because they see all these problems, but then a buyer comes back and it's only 2 grand that they want fixed.
So we're gonna have a class specifically on the offer and purchase and sale, depending on what state you're in, but that where it talks about, you know, the disclose. We've all seen the thing sold as is. Does as is mean anything?
No.
No. Everything's a negotiation.
But then you can also offer a home warranty too.
Exactly.
Your seller, you could talk to your seller about doing that. There's always a.
Yeah, $660 for a lifetime or a year of no stress. Yeah. But having, I agree with the pre-inspection on certain properties, and also you can say, hey, look, you're going into it. We know that there's bad seals in 2 of the 8 windows in the house, and you have that in the disclosure. The disclosure mitigates those problems. They should not be using known issues before. If you disclose, hey, there's 2 bad seals, so you've got some smog in the window.
Prior to an offer being put
Prior to an offer, they should have adjusted for that.
Yeah.
So
the price should be according to what you know
exactly.
about the home.
Right.
So, and I guess that's where a pre-listing inspection could also be something where you don't want it because you're like, oh, well now we're dropping the price.
Well, no, because you're disclosing.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So you're disclosing. So you're saying, look, I could have priced this home at $360,000,
But
but because of these issues, and we're disclosing, and we don't want to do it, we're selling it at $342.
Okay.
I think it's important how, that's interesting, because if the seller is willing to take that on and share that inspection, it really depends on how positively or how it's presented by the listing agent, really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because really all the conversations go through the listing agent.
Yeah, well, so I
That's
had
amazing.
a seller ask me, they're like, do you think that we should do a pre-listing inspection? And I asked somebody else's advice on it, and they were like, absolutely not. They're like, in the, you know, however many years I've been doing it, I've never done one.
So in the book club, read the Oz Principle. It talks about sticking your head in the sand.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what you're doing there.
When you're not doing it.
When you're not doing it, you're saying, I'd rather not know and not.
I'd rather turn a blind eye than.
Yeah.
But it's really up to them if they want to.
Sure.
Right. You can't say, hey, you shouldn't do one, then that's.
Then you're kind of pushing your client in the wrong direction.
Wrong direction, right.
Yeah.
In
But
the
the other
I'd say-
example that I've used in so many classes is Martha and Henry. They've owned their home for 50 years. If you even start to tell them about the things that happen in a home inspection nowadays and what lead paint and what radon are, it's so much for them to understand. So I think that's another example. And it may be that Henry died and Martha's left there alone in the home. She doesn't understand the things that could come up. So again, it could be her choice to do that to get a better understanding of the home that they've lived in for all of these years.
Yeah, because maybe her husband took care of everything and she wasn't, you know, necessarily aware 100% of what went
I
on.
had a situation in Tewksbury, I had a house listed, and two things happened. One, it had been on the market for a bit, and a buyer made an offer, went to home inspection, and she was just completely overwhelmed by it. It wasn't a home inspector that she hired. The buyer's agent did say that he was extremely negative, alarmed her at every, you know. So she backs out, house sits on the market for a bit. I said to the sellers, listen, why don't we have an inspection? Because they wouldn't share the report. So we don't know what the issues were. So had an inspection and still no offer. So I went back to that agent and I said, did your buyers find anything? No, we're still looking. Listen, the sellers went and did their own home inspection, and they gave me permission to share the report with you, and also to tell you that they've committed to, you know, addressing all of these items. So we ended up saving that deal, which is interesting because that's how it ended up being saved, because the sellers went and had an inspection done.
Yeah, and I suppose
Second
that's a
thing-
different situation because you're like, well, there is something wrong, now we just don't know what it is.
Right.
So now it's just more of a, we know something's there, but what is it?
Yeah.
Now we wanna find it, so.
So second thing was, it was a 4% listing, and I co-broked it at 2. Buyer's agent said, I've gotta have 2.5%. We're not moving forward if you don't pay 2.5. At the time, I was with another brokerage who said, we will not allow you to pay out more than we make. So, which to me was like, now I feel like the seller thinks I'm secretly working for the buyer just to like increase the commission. So, we closed it at 5%. But I felt like, wow. Like,
They can't do that through code of ethics, just
that's
FYI.
what my manager told me, we do not allow you to, you can't pay out more than you make.
Oh,
I was like,
that can be a company policy. What that other agent said, that you wouldn't move forward without the 2.5, that's
that was
the
such an
violation.
uncomfortable conversation for me to have, because I was like, you signed at 4, now in order to close, I'm telling you, you've gotta pay 5.
We're gonna go over that on Monday.
Wouldn't that agent have gotten it from his buyer?
No.
As part of his buyer contract?
He could have got paid from his.
That's what I'm saying, if it
right,
was
but
in the
that's
buyer contract.
yeah. But we'll go over that in the code of ethics. But it's unfortunate that that stuff happens.
Yeah.
There's a proper way to do it.
Yeah.
And that's not holding a deal hostage.
Yeah.
You were gonna say something. I'm sorry.
I'm a fan of a pre-listing home inspection. I built it into the 7 secrets buyer and seller presentation and into the book, only because I feel like any transaction, any business deal, any contract in life, like anything built on transparency, in my opinion, is always just an easier deal.
Right.
Like I am.
There's no surprise.
You know it up front.
That's how I
And you
feel
can always
like.
get a buyer who wants to
yeah.
waive inspection, boom.
And you will get those because they feel like, wow, here's the home inspection, here's what's wrong, here's what we fixed, here's what we're not gonna fix. You will definitely get buyers that say, all right, I'm cool with
And
knowing.
$500.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it saves time, because
Yes.
I had the radon issue with the seller, didn't really want to have a pre-inspection, didn't think there was radon, and guess what, there was radon. So the first buyer pulled out because of that. They backed out, and they mediated it, remedied it. They paid the fee. I think it was almost a couple of thousand, to pay for that. And then they got a second buy, but there was that time that was wasted in between.
Right.
So.
Or deals fall apart,
Yeah,
or
that's what
I feel like lack of transparency causes all kinds of deal problems,
Yeah.
doubt deal problems, and you have people putting in offers that are really not their offer because they're going to come back and negotiate. Whereas if you start the whole transaction and say, hey, here's what's wrong with the property, we priced it accordingly, put your offer in knowing that the roof is going to need to be replaced.
Right.
People do.
Yeah.
So another good example of why to do this is there's these condos in Manchester that when they were built in the 80s had, I can't remember the name of the company, it doesn't matter, but the circuit boxes are all recalled. But nobody's ever updated them.
Yeah.
I've sold 3 units in there. What I tell people is, look, we can list it, and you can wait for the home inspector to come in and tell you that this has been recalled, and it's going to cost you $1,500 in value, or we can do it now, address it, and it's going to cost you $500 to have an electrician come in. You had that pre-inspection done. The benefit to the seller is, look, and I'm sorry if I go against what you're saying or your spirit of it, but the way I do it is, look, let's do the pre-inspection. At closing, I'll pay for the home inspection to have been done. You pay for it now. At closing, you'll get the $350 back. One, it doesn't cost me anything until closing. But 2, I say, look, we don't have to disclose anything that's not a latent defect. If it comes in and says that you've got dead ground in all your outlets, well, no kidding, every single house everywhere has dead grounds in the outlets because of the way that the things are done. So those are easy things.
Right.
We can address those. Windows, I hate losing a deal over a freaking window. So a window, that's something we can address and say, hey, look, that's there. These are the benefits to you because now you're not waiting 14 days in, get all excited, start packing your boxes just to be told, hurry up, wait, no, never mind, let's put it back on the market. I want to make sure you're happy, and the best way to do that is to make sure you're informed and that we're informing and getting good offers in.
You see what Eric just said? What was he talking about before? Representing an area that you know locally.
Right.
Because he had this knowledge of this
Yeah.
local thing, he was better able to serve his seller by telling them that up front so that they could address it.
Well, and that's like, you should like, people are like under the assumption sometimes, like if you're buying new construction, it's brand new construction, I don't need a home inspection. Well, no, that's not true, you should still have one, because we are all human, people make mistakes, things get overlooked, you know, or you could not understand something that the home inspector could bring to light for you.
Even just to understand how the home works.
Especially
Yeah,
first
that's
time home
education.
buyers, first time home
First
buyers.
time home buyers
Yeah,
inspection.
because
They
people are
don't
like,
wanna-
oh, new construction, well, nothing could be wrong with it, it just got built. Well, it's like, that's not the case, you know,
Yeah.
so.
This was a great first day.
Thank
I
you.
think there's a lot, yeah, I think
I
there's
wanna
a
make
lot.
a side note, so you guys are all talking about inspections.
But she's
I
off
wanna make
camera.
sure you guys have the right inspector in your, you know, when you're doing it, because you could have the wrong inspector that will literally scare the daylights out of their clients.
Yeah.
So if he's very negative and scares them, you don't want that guy. There's a way to tell somebody that there's something wrong in a very polite and mute
Yeah.
way than scaring them.
I had that happen.
I had a deal fall apart because we had a bad inspector.